What if the world had never broken apart? Picture this. You wake tomorrow morning, and instead of looking out at familiar coastlines shaped by ancient separations, you see an endless landmass stretching beyond every horizon. No Atlantic Ocean divides Europe from the Americas. No Pacific isolates Asia from distant shores. The Earth exists as one massive continent, just as it did 300 million years ago, when all the land we know today pressed together in a supercontinent called Pangea. But Pangea never fractured. The tectonic forces that should have torn it apart never came. The slow dance of continental drift never began. And humanity, if it emerged at all, developed on a world that remained whole. Tonight, we're going to explore that world. We'll walk through landscapes that never existed, meet civilizations that could never have been, and uncover the hidden consequences of a planet that refused to break. Some of what we'll discover comes from science, the hard facts of geology, climate, and evolution. Some comes from the whispered theories of those who believe our fractured world was no accident, and some comes from the space between myth and reality, where the most haunting truths often hide. So settle in, let the familiar world fade away, and let's step into the shadow of the continent that never split. The unbroken land. In our world, Pangea began its slow dissolution around 200 million years ago. Massive tectonic forces pulled the supercontinent apart, creating the Atlantic Ocean, separating what would become Africa from South America, Europe from North America. But what if those forces had never awakened? What if the Earth's crust had remained still, locked in its ancient configuration? The geography alone would have reshaped everything we know about existence. Imagine standing at the center of this unbroken landmass, thousands of miles from any ocean. The heart of Pangea would have been a vast desert, cut off from the moderating influence of sea breezes, baked by relentless sun. Temperatures here could have soared beyond anything we experience today, perhaps reaching 140 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, creating a furnace that would make the Sahara seem temperate. This wasn't speculation. Scientists have modelled what Pangea's climate would have looked like, and the results paint a picture of extremes that would challenge life itself. The interior would have been a hyper-arid wasteland, where rain might not fall for years at a time. Massive dust storms would have swept across thousands of miles of barren rock and sand, carrying particles from one end of the continent to the other. These seasonal temperature swings would have been brutal, scorching summers followed by winters that could plunge well below freezing, with no nearby ocean to buffer the changes. But the edges of this supercontinent would have told a different story. The coastlines, what few existed, would have been lush tropical paradises. Monsoon rains would have drenched these narrow bands of habitable land, creating dense forests and swamplands that stretched for hundreds of miles inland before giving way to the harsh interior. These coastal regions would have been the only places where complex life could have thrived, creating a ring of green around a dead heart. The ocean that surrounded Pangea, called Panthalassa, would have been vast beyond imagination. With no continents to break up its circulation, massive currents would have swept around the globe uninterrupted. These currents would have been more powerful than anything we see today, creating weather patterns that could have spawned storms of incredible intensity. Hurricanes the size of entire modern countries might have been common, their fury unbroken by land masses until they finally crashed against Pangea's shores. And in this alien ocean, life would have evolved along completely different paths. Without the shallow seas and diverse coastlines that continental drift eventually created, marine ecosystems would have been simpler, but perhaps more extreme. Giant creatures might have dominated the deep waters of Panthalassa, never needing to adapt to the varied environments that our fractured world eventually provided. But perhaps the most profound difference would have been in the very rocks beneath our feet. The process of continental drift doesn't just move land, it creates new crust, destroys old crust, and constantly recycles the materials that make up our planet's surface. Without this process, the Earth's crust would have remained largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. The mountains we know today, the Himalayas, the Rockies, the Alps, would never have formed. Instead, Pangea would have been a relatively flat expanse, worn down by eons of erosion with no tectonic forces to push new peaks skyward. The implications ripple outward from there. Without mountain ranges to create rain shadows and diverse microclimates, weather patterns would have been simpler but more extreme. Without the constant recycling of crustal material, the chemical composition of the atmosphere and oceans would have evolved differently. And without the isolation that comes from separated continents, evolution itself would have followed radically different paths. This was the stage upon which life would have had to perform its greatest act, the emergence of intelligence. But would that performance have been possible at all? The evolution that never was. In our world, the breakup of Pangea was one of the great drivers of evolution. As continents drifted apart, populations of plants and animals became isolated from each other. Cut off from their relatives, these isolated groups evolved in different directions, adapting to new environments and eventually becoming entirely new species. This process, called allopatric speciation, is responsible for much of the incredible diversity of life we see today. But in a world where Pangea never split, this engine of evolution would have been largely silent. Consider what this means. The ancestors of humans evolved in Africa, but their journey to intelligence was shaped by millions of years of environmental pressure and genetic isolation. Different populations faced different challenges, developed different adaptations, and occasionally reconnected to share their innovations. This constant cycle of separation and reunion, driven by changing climates and shifting geography, pushed our ancestors toward greater intelligence and adaptability. On an unbroken Pangea, that pressure might never have existed. Early primates, if they evolved at all, would have faced a more uniform environment. The extreme climate of the interior would have been largely uninhabitable, forcing most life to cluster around the coastal regions. With less geographic diversity and fewer barriers to gene flow, evolution would have proceeded more slowly, more conservatively. Some researchers have suggested that intelligence itself might never have emerged on such a world. The cognitive abilities that make humans unique, our capacity for abstract thought, complex language, and technological innovation, may have been forged in the crucible of environmental uncertainty that comes from living on a geographically dynamic planet. Remove that dynamism, and you might remove the very pressures that create intelligence. But there's another possibility, one that's more intriguing and perhaps more unsettling. What if the lack of geographic barriers had actually accelerated certain kinds of evolution? What if, instead of the slow, steady development of intelligence we see in our world, Pangea had produced something entirely different? Think about it this way. In our world, early human populations were small and scattered, often isolated from each other for thousands of years at a time. This isolation meant that beneficial mutations, the random genetic changes that occasionally improve survival, had to arise independently in different groups. It was an inefficient process, full of dead ends and lost opportunities. But on Pangea, with its ring of habitable coastal land, early human populations might have remained in constant contact with each other. Beneficial mutations could have spread rapidly through the entire species. Instead of the slow, stuttering progress of isolated groups, human evolution might have proceeded as a coordinated species-wide effort. The results could have been extraordinary. Instead of taking millions of years to develop agriculture, humans on Pangea might have made the transition in thousands. Instead of the gradual development of technology we see in our world, they might have leaped directly from stone tools to advanced metallurgy. The constant exchange of ideas and innovations across the entire habitable world could have created a feedback loop of accelerating progress. Or it could have created something else entirely. Some theorists have suggested that the extreme environment of Pangea's interior might have served as a different kind of evolutionary pressure. Not the geographic isolation that drove evolution in our world, but a constant challenge that required cooperation and innovation to overcome. Early humans might have been forced to develop technologies and social structures far in advance of anything we achieved, simply to survive in a world of such climatic extremes. There are whispers in certain circles of evidence that this might have actually happened. Ancient texts that speak of technologies that seem impossible for their time. Archaeological anomalies that suggest advanced knowledge in prehistoric cultures. Genetic studies that hint at periods of rapid evolution in human history that don't quite match the timeline we expect. Most scientists dismiss these claims as misinterpretation or wishful thinking. But what if they're wrong? What if the world we live in, fractured, divided, shaped by the slow drift of continents, is actually the aberration? What if the natural state of a planet is to remain whole, and the intelligence that emerges on such worlds is something we can barely imagine? But that raises an even more disturbing question. If Pangea was the natural state, if continental drift was an anomaly, then what force was powerful enough to tear apart a supercontinent that should have remained whole? The forces that should have stayed silent. The breakup of Pangea wasn't supposed to happen. At least that's what some researchers are beginning to suspect. For decades, geologists have explained continental drift as the inevitable result of convection currents in the Earth's mantle. Hot rock rises from deep within the planet, spreads out beneath the crust, cools and sinks back down, creating a slow but inexorable circulation that drags the continents along like leaves on a stream. It's an elegant theory, supported by mountains of evidence, and it explains not just the breakup of Pangea, but the entire history of continental movement stretching back billions of years. But there are problems with this explanation. Subtle inconsistencies that most people never hear about. Anomalies in the timing and pattern of continental drift that don't quite fit the standard model. And increasingly, some scientists are beginning to wonder if the forces that tore Pangea apart were not entirely natural. The first hint that something might be wrong comes from the timing. Pangea began to break apart around 200 million years ago, during the late Triassic period. This was also the time of one of the largest mass extinction events in Earth's history, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, which wiped out roughly 76% of all marine and terrestrial species. The timing seems too convenient to be coincidental. Most geologists explain this as cause and effect. The same volcanic activity that drove continental drift also pumped massive amounts of carbon dioxide and toxic gases into the atmosphere, causing the mass extinction. But some researchers have begun to wonder if the causation might run the other way. What if the mass extinction came first, and the breakup of Pangea was a response to it? This might sound like academic hair-splitting, but the implications are profound. If continental drift was triggered by the extinction event rather than causing it, then we need to ask what caused the extinction in the first place. And some of the answers being proposed are deeply unsettling. One theory suggests that the Triassic-Jurassic extinction was caused by an impact event, a massive asteroid or comet that struck the Earth with enough force to destabilize the entire planet. The impact wouldn't just have caused immediate devastation, it might have triggered changes deep within the Earth's mantle that eventually led to the breakup of Pangea. In this scenario, continental drift wasn't a natural process, but the planet's response to a cosmic catastrophe. But there's another possibility, one that ventures into territory that mainstream science prefers not to explore. What if the force that broke apart Pangea wasn't natural at all? What if it was artificial? This idea first surfaced in the work of certain fringe researchers who noticed patterns in the way Pangea broke apart that seemed too precise to be random. The continents didn't just drift apart haphazardly, they separated along specific lines that created particular configurations of land and sea. The Atlantic Ocean, for instance, opened up in a way that created nearly perfect symmetry between the coastlines of Africa and South America. The separation of India from Antarctica followed a path that would eventually drive the subcontinent into Asia with exactly the right force and angle to create the Himalayas. To most geologists, these patterns are simply the result of the underlying structure of the Earth's crust, weak points and stress lines that determined how the supercontinent would fracture. But to a small group of researchers, they suggest something else: intelligent design. The theory goes like this: an advanced civilization, either terrestrial or extraterrestrial, recognized that Pangea's extreme climate and limited biodiversity made it unsuitable for the development of complex life. So they intervened, using technology we can barely imagine to trigger the breakup of the supercontinent. The goal wasn't destruction, but creation, the formation of a world with diverse climates, isolated populations, and the geographic complexity necessary for evolution to flourish. It sounds like science fiction, but the proponents of this theory point to several pieces of evidence. Ancient texts from various cultures that describe gods or advanced beings reshaping the earth, geological anomalies that suggest the application of enormous, precisely directed forces, and perhaps most intriguingly, the fact that the breakup of Pangea led directly to the conditions that allowed human intelligence to evolve. In this view, we are not the accidental products of random geological processes, but the intended outcome of a vast terraforming project that began 200 million years ago. The world we inhabit, with its separated continents, diverse climates, and rich biodiversity, was designed specifically to nurture the development of intelligence. Most scientists reject this theory as unfounded speculation. They point out that the patterns in continental drift can be explained by natural processes, that ancient texts are unreliable sources of geological information, and that the evolution of intelligence doesn't require artificial intervention. The breakup of Pangea, they argue, was simply the result of natural forces operating over vast timescales. But what if they're wrong? What if the evidence for artificial intervention is hiding in plain sight, dismissed by a scientific establishment that's too committed to naturalistic explanations to see the truth? And if that's the case, then we need to ask an even more disturbing question: who or what had the power to reshape an entire planet, and why did they want to create a world like ours? The civilization that never rose. If Pangea had never split, would human civilization have emerged at all? And if it had, what would it have looked like? These questions take us into the realm of pure speculation, but it's speculation grounded in what we know about how geography shapes culture. In our world, the development of civilization was intimately tied to the existence of separate continents and the barriers they created. The isolation of different human populations led to the independent development of agriculture, writing, metallurgy, and other key technologies. When these isolated civilizations eventually made contact with each other, the exchange of ideas and innovations drove rapid cultural and technological advancement. But on an unbroken Pangea, this process would have been fundamentally different. With no oceans to separate populations, human cultures would have remained in constant contact from the very beginning. There would have been no independent invention of agriculture in multiple locations, no separate development of writing systems, no isolated technological traditions that could later be combined and refined. At first glance, this might seem like it would have accelerated human development. After all, if beneficial innovations could spread immediately across the entire human population, wouldn't progress have been faster? But the reality might have been more complex. Consider agriculture, the foundation of all complex civilization. In our world, agriculture was independently invented at least 7 times in different parts of the globe. In the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, Eastern North America, New Guinea, and the Sahel region of Africa. Each of these agricultural traditions was based on different crops and techniques, adapted to local conditions and needs. When these traditions eventually came into contact with each other, the exchange of crops and methods led to dramatic improvements in productivity and the ability to support larger populations. But on Pangea, agriculture might have been invented only once, in whatever region had the right combination of climate and available plants. From there, it would have spread gradually around the habitable coastal ring, but it would have remained essentially unchanged. Without the pressure of competing agricultural systems, there would have been little incentive to innovate or improve. The result might have been a form of agriculture that was adequate but not optimal, capable of supporting small settlements but not the large cities that drive technological advancement. The same pattern might have applied to other key technologies: metallurgy, writing, mathematics, astronomy. All of these might have developed more slowly on Pangea, not because the people were less intelligent, but because the geographic conditions that drive innovation were absent. But there's another possibility, one that's both more intriguing and more troubling. What if the extreme conditions of Pangea's interior had forced human civilization to develop along entirely different lines? What if, instead of the agricultural settlements that form the basis of our civilization, humans on Pangea had been forced to become something else entirely? Think about it. The habitable zone on Pangea would have been a narrow ring around the coast, with the vast interior remaining largely uninhabitable. But that interior wouldn't have been completely empty. It would have contained resources, minerals, perhaps underground water sources, maybe even unique forms of life adapted to the extreme conditions. Any civilization that wanted to exploit these resources would have needed to develop technologies far in advance of anything we achieved. They would have needed ways to survive in temperatures that could kill an unprotected human in minutes. They would have needed transportation systems capable of crossing thousands of miles of desert. They would have needed communication networks that could function across vast distances without the benefit of natural landmarks or reliable weather patterns. In short, they would have needed to become a technological civilization almost from the beginning, not as a luxury but as a necessity for survival. Some researchers have suggested that this might have led to a form of civilization that was radically different from anything we can imagine. Instead of the city-states and agricultural empires that characterized our world, Pangea might have given rise to a single, unified technological society. A planetary civilization that developed advanced science and engineering not for conquest or comfort, but simply to survive in a hostile environment. This civilization might have achieved things that we're only beginning to dream of. They might have developed fusion power to provide energy in a world where fossil fuels were scarce and solar power was unreliable. They might have created artificial ecosystems to support life in the interior deserts. They might have built transportation networks that could move people and goods across continents in hours rather than months. And they might have done all of this hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the first dinosaurs walked the earth. It sounds impossible, but there are hints that something like this might have actually happened. Ancient geological formations that seem too regular to be natural. Mineral deposits that appear to have been artificially concentrated. Isotopic ratios in certain rocks that suggest the presence of artificial nuclear reactions in the distant past. Most geologists dismiss these anomalies as the result of natural processes that we don't fully understand yet. But a small group of researchers has begun to wonder if they might be evidence of something else, the remnants of a technological civilization that existed on Earth long before complex life was supposed to have evolved. If this civilization existed, what happened to it? Did it destroy itself in some catastrophic war or environmental disaster? Did it transcend physical existence and move on to some higher plane of being? Or did it simply decide that its work was done and deliberately erase all traces of its existence? And if it did exist, did it have anything to do with the breakup of Pangea? Was the fracturing of the supercontinent not a natural geological process, but the final act of a civilization that had decided to reshape the world for whatever would come after it? But that raises the most disturbing question of all. If there was a previous technological civilization on Earth, and if it was responsible for creating the conditions that allowed our civilization to develop, then what does that make us? Are we the inheritors of an ancient legacy, or are we simply the latest experiment in a project that began hundreds of millions of years ago? The ocean that never formed water shapes everything. It carves canyons, builds deltas, drives weather patterns, and creates the conditions that allow life to flourish. But perhaps most importantly, it serves as a barrier, separating populations, creating isolated environments where evolution can work its magic, and forcing civilizations to develop the technologies and skills needed to cross vast distances. In our world, the breakup of Pangea created the Atlantic Ocean, a body of water so vast that it took until the 15th century for humans to successfully cross it. That crossing changed everything, bringing together civilizations that had developed in isolation for thousands of years, triggering an exchange of ideas, technologies, diseases, and genetic material that reshaped the entire world. But what if that ocean had never formed? What if the Atlantic had remained nothing more than a narrow rift valley, easily crossed on foot? How would human history have unfolded differently? The implications are staggering. Without the Atlantic as a barrier, the civilizations of Europe and the Americas would never have developed in isolation. There would have been no independent invention of agriculture in Mesoamerica, no separate development of metallurgy in the Andes, no unique cultural traditions that could later be combined and refined. Instead, human culture would have remained essentially uniform across the entire habitable world. This might sound like it would have prevented the conflicts and misunderstandings that arose when different civilizations first made contact. After all, If all humans shared the same basic culture and technology, there would be no basis for the kind of cultural imperialism that characterized the European colonization of the Americas. But the reality might have been more complex, and perhaps more troubling. Without geographic barriers to create diversity, human society might have become stagnant. In our world, the tension between different civilizations, their competition for resources, their exchange of ideas, their conflicts and collaborations, has been one of the primary drivers of technological and cultural advancement. Remove that tension, and you might remove the very forces that push civilization forward. Consider the development of navigation technology. In our world, the need to cross oceans drove innovations in shipbuilding, astronomy, mathematics, and cartography. The desire to find new trade routes led to the development of more accurate maps, better instruments, and more sophisticated understanding of wind and current patterns. But on Pangea, with no oceans to cross, these technologies might never have been developed at all. The same might be true for many other key innovations. The printing press was developed partly to meet the demand for books created by increased trade and cultural exchange between distant regions. The scientific revolution was fueled by the exchange of ideas between scholars in different countries. Even basic concepts like standardized weights and measures emerged from the need to facilitate trade across cultural boundaries. Without these pressures, human civilization on Pangea might have remained essentially medieval for thousands of years, technologically sophisticated enough to survive in the harsh environment, but lacking the drive to push beyond the basics of survival. But there's another possibility, one that's both more hopeful and more mysterious. What if the absence of oceanic barriers had led to a completely different kind of civilization, one based not on competition and conflict, but on cooperation and shared purpose? Think about it. In our world, the existence of separate continents meant that human populations were constantly competing for limited resources. Different groups developed different technologies and strategies for survival, and when they came into contact, the result was often conflict. But on Pangea, with its ring of habitable coastal land and its vast, resource-rich interior, there might have been enough space and resources for everyone, if they were willing to work together. This could have led to the development of a truly global civilization from the very beginning, not a collection of competing nation-states, but a single, unified human society dedicated to the common goal of survival and prosperity in a challenging environment. Such a civilization might have achieved things that our fractured world can only dream of. They might have developed sustainable technologies that could support a large population without depleting natural resources. They might have created social systems that eliminated poverty, inequality, and conflict. They might have achieved a level of scientific understanding that allowed them to manipulate matter and energy in ways that seem magical to us. And they might have done all of this while maintaining a deep connection to the natural world, not seeing themselves as separate from nature, but as part of a larger system that included the entire planet. Some researchers have suggested that traces of this civilization might still exist, hidden in the deepest parts of the ocean or buried beneath miles of sediment. They point to underwater structures that seem too regular to be natural, to isotopic signatures in ancient rocks that suggest the presence of advanced technology, to genetic markers in modern humans that hint at contact with a more advanced species in the distant past. Most scientists dismiss these claims as misinterpretation of natural phenomena or wishful thinking. But what if they're wrong? What if the evidence for an ancient global civilization is hiding in plain sight, dismissed by a scientific establishment that's too committed to the idea of gradual human progress to see the truth? And if such a civilization existed, what happened to it? Did it transcend physical existence and move on to some higher plane of being? Did it leave Earth to explore the stars? Or is it still here, hidden from view, watching and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that this civilization never disappeared at all. Perhaps it simply went underground, literally and figuratively, retreating to hidden cities beneath the Earth's surface, or to parallel dimensions that exist alongside our own. Perhaps the breakup of Pangea wasn't a natural geological process, but a deliberate act by this civilization, designed to create the conditions necessary for a new phase of human evolution. In this view, we are not the descendants of primitive hunter-gatherers who slowly developed civilization over thousands of years. We are the inheritors of an ancient legacy, the products of a vast experiment in consciousness and evolution that began when the world was still whole. A climate that never changed. Climate is the invisible hand that shapes everything, the distribution of life, the flow of rivers, the rise and fall of civilizations. In our world, the breakup of Pangea fundamentally altered the planet's climate system, creating the diverse weather patterns and regional variations that make Earth habitable for such a wide variety of life forms. But what if that climate system had never changed? What if Earth had remained locked in the extreme weather patterns that characterize the supercontinent? The climate of Pangea would have been unlike anything we experience today. Computer models suggest that the interior of the supercontinent would have been a hyperarid desert, with temperatures that could exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit in summer and plunge well below freezing in winter. The lack of nearby oceans to moderate these extremes would have created a climate so harsh that complex life might have been impossible across vast areas of the planet. But the coastal regions would have told a different story. The edges of Pangea would have experienced intense monsoon seasons, with massive storms bringing torrential rains that could dump years' worth of precipitation in a matter of weeks. These monsoons would have been far more powerful than anything we see today, driven by the extreme temperature differences between the scorching interior and the relatively cool ocean. The result would have been a world of incredible contrasts. Lush, tropical forests along the coasts giving way abruptly to barren deserts, just a few hundred miles inland. The transition zones between these extremes would have been narrow bands of semi-arid land, subject to dramatic seasonal variations that would have made them nearly uninhabitable for most forms of life. This climate system would have remained essentially stable for hundreds of millions of years, without the moderating influence of continental drift, which creates new ocean basins, alters current patterns, and changes the distribution of land and sea. Pangea's climate would have been locked in a pattern of extremes that might have persisted until the sun itself began to change. The implications for life would have been profound. In our world, climate change has been one of the primary drivers of evolution. Ice ages, warming periods, changes in sea level, and shifts in precipitation patterns have all forced life to adapt, migrate, or go extinct. These pressures have led to the incredible diversity of species we see today, and have played a crucial role in the evolution of intelligence. But on Pangea, with its stable but extreme climate, evolution would have proceeded very differently. Life would have been concentrated in the narrow coastal zones, with little opportunity for the geographic isolation that drives speciation. The result might have been a world with far fewer species, but with those species being incredibly well adapted to their specific environments. Some researchers have suggested that this could have led to the evolution of life forms that were far more advanced than anything we see today. Without the constant pressure of climate change forcing rapid adaptation, evolution on Pangea might have had the time and stability needed to develop truly sophisticated organisms, creatures with capabilities that would seem almost magical to us. Imagine plants that could survive in the extreme heat of Pangea's interior by developing internal cooling systems more efficient than any air conditioner. Picture animals that could migrate thousands of miles across the desert, navigating by magnetic fields or stellar positions with an accuracy that surpasses our best technology. Envision ecosystems so perfectly balanced that they could maintain themselves for millions of years without any external input. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that the stable climate of Pangea might have allowed for the development of a form of life that transcended the usual boundaries between species. In our world, the constant pressure of environmental change has led to fierce competition between different organisms, with each species fighting for its own survival. But on Pangea, with its vast spaces and stable conditions, there might have been room for a different kind of evolution, one based on cooperation rather than competition. This could have led to the emergence of what some researchers call a superorganism, a form of life that encompasses multiple species working together as a single, integrated system. We see hints of this in our world in the form of symbiotic relationships between different organisms, but on Pangea it might have evolved to a much more sophisticated level. Imagine an ecosystem where plants, animals, and even microorganisms were so closely integrated that they functioned as a single planet-spanning organism. This superorganism might have developed capabilities that no individual species could achieve. The ability to manipulate weather patterns, to communicate across vast distances, to store and process information on a scale that dwarfs our most powerful computers. Some theorists have suggested that this superorganism might still exist, hidden beneath the surface of our fractured world. They point to unexplained phenomena, synchronized behavior in widely separated animal populations, mysterious changes in atmospheric composition, subtle alterations in the Earth's magnetic field, as evidence that something vast and intelligent is still operating behind the scenes. Most scientists dismiss these ideas as fantasy, but there are some intriguing pieces of evidence that are harder to explain away. Satellite images that show patterns in vegetation growth that seem too regular to be natural. Seismic data that suggest the existence of vast hollow spaces beneath the Earth's surface. Genetic studies that reveal unexpected connections between species that should have evolved independently. Could these be traces of the superorganism that evolved on Pangea? And if so, what role did it play in the breakup of the supercontinent? Was the fracturing of Pangea a natural geological process, or was it orchestrated by an intelligence that had grown beyond the need for a physical form? The questions multiply, but the answers remain elusive. What we do know is that the climate system that would have existed on an unbroken Pangea would have been unlike anything in our experience. A world of extremes that might have given rise to forms of life and intelligence that we can barely imagine. And perhaps that's the most unsettling thought of all. If such intelligence existed, and if it was responsible for reshaping our world, then everything we think we know about the history of life on Earth might be wrong. We might not be the first intelligent species to evolve on this planet, but merely the latest in a series of experiments conducted by minds so advanced that we can't even recognize their handiwork. The whispers of what remains. There are places on Earth where the ancient world still shows through, cracks in the modern facade where something older, stranger and more mysterious reveals itself to those who know how to look. These places don't appear on any tourist maps. They're not marked by historical societies or protected by governments. They exist in the spaces between, in the deep ocean trenches where no light has ever penetrated, in the hearts of mountain ranges that have stood unchanged for hundreds of millions of years, in the vast underground cave systems that honeycomb the continents like the chambers of some enormous sleeping heart. And in these places, some researchers claim, you can still find traces of the world that never was, fragments of Pangea that somehow survived the Great Breaking, islands of ancient stability in a sea of geological chaos. The first hints of these anomalies came from deep-sea exploration in the 1970s. Oceanographers mapping the floor of the Atlantic discovered formations that didn't fit the standard model of seafloor spreading. Instead of the relatively young rock that should have been there, formed as the continents drifted apart, they found patches of much older material, some of it dating back to the time when Pangea was still intact. Most geologists explain these discoveries as fragments of the original supercontinent that had been left behind during the breakup, like pieces of a broken plate scattered across the floor. But a few researchers began to wonder if there might be more to the story. What if these weren't just random fragments, but the remnants of something larger and more organized? The theory that emerged from this speculation was both elegant and disturbing. What if the breakup of Pangea hadn't been complete? What if significant portions of the original supercontinent had somehow resisted the forces of continental drift, remaining hidden beneath the oceans or buried deep within the Earth's crust? This idea gained support from an unexpected source: the study of ancient life forms. Paleontologists had long been puzzled by certain fossils that seemed to show up in places where they shouldn't exist, according to the standard model of continental drift. Species that should have been separated by the breakup of Pangea were found on continents that had supposedly been isolated from each other for hundreds of millions of years. The usual explanation was that these species had somehow managed to cross the newly formed oceans, perhaps by rafting on floating debris or by island hopping across chains of volcanic peaks. But some researchers began to suspect that there might be a simpler explanation. What if these species had never been separated at all? What if there were still connections between the continents that we hadn't discovered yet? The search for these hidden connections led to some remarkable discoveries. Sonar mapping of the ocean floor revealed underwater ridges and plateaus that seemed to form continuous chains between continents. Seismic studies detected vast underground structures that appeared to connect distant land masses, and satellite imagery began to reveal patterns in ocean currents and atmospheric circulation that suggested the presence of large, submerged land masses. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence came from the unexpected source: the study of human genetics. As DNA analysis became more sophisticated, researchers began to notice patterns in human genetic diversity that didn't quite match the standard model of human migration. There were genetic markers that suggested contact between populations that should have been isolated from each other, and there were gaps in the genetic record that hinted at the existence of human populations that had somehow disappeared from the historical record. Some researchers began to wonder if these anomalies might be evidence of something extraordinary: human populations that had survived on the hidden remnants of Pangea, maintaining their ancient ways of life in isolation from the rest of the world. The idea sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but there are tantalizing hints that it might be true. Indigenous legends from around the world speak of lost lands and hidden peoples. Ancient maps show islands and continents that don't exist on modern charts, and there are persistent reports from deep-sea explorers and cave researchers of structures that seem too regular to be natural and too old to be the work of any known civilization. Most scientists dismiss these reports as misidentification of natural phenomena or as hoaxes perpetrated by attention seekers, but a small group of researchers has begun to take them seriously, and what they're finding is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. They speak of underwater cities with architecture that predates any known civilization. They describe cave systems that extend for thousands of miles beneath the Earth's surface, connecting continents in ways that shouldn't be possible. They report encounters with forms of life that seem to be living fossils, creatures that should have gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago, but that somehow survived in these hidden pockets of the ancient world. The most compelling accounts come from deep-sea research vessels working in the abyssal depths of the Atlantic. Here, where the seafloor should show nothing but the relatively young rock of oceanic crust, sonar has detected structures that rise from the darkness like the ruins of forgotten towers. The formations are massive, some extending for dozens of miles, and they display a geometric precision that seems impossible to explain through natural processes. When submersibles have attempted to investigate these structures directly, they've encountered phenomena that defy easy explanation. Equipment malfunctions are common, with instruments registering readings that shouldn't be possible at such depths. Some expeditions have reported strange acoustic signatures, sounds that seem almost like communication, but following patterns unlike anything in the natural world. But perhaps the most disturbing reports come from the cave systems themselves. Speleologists working in the deepest accessible caverns have found passages that seem to extend far beyond what geology would suggest is possible. These passages are often lined with minerals that shouldn't exist at such depths, and they maintain temperatures that are far too warm for their location. In these deep places, researchers claim to have found evidence of habitation, not recent, but ancient beyond measure, tool marks in the stone that show techniques unknown to archaeology, chambers that seem designed for purposes that no one can identify, and occasionally artifacts that appear to be made from materials that don't exist in nature. Most scientists who hear these reports dismiss them as misidentification or fabrication. The deep ocean and deep caves are hostile environments where equipment failure is common and where the mind can play tricks on even experienced researchers. The structures detected by sonar could be natural formations that only seem artificial due to the limitations of the technology. The strange readings could be the result of unknown geological processes. The acoustic signatures could be nothing more than the sounds of water movement through complex rock formations. But what if they're wrong? What if the hidden remnants of Pangea are more than just geological curiosities? What if they're the last traces of something that existed on Earth, long before our own civilization emerged? The deep time architects. If there was indeed a technological civilization on Pangea, a species that achieved advanced science and engineering hundreds of millions of years before humans appeared, then the question becomes, what were they trying to accomplish? The clues, if they can be called that, are scattered and fragmentary. But when pieced together, they suggest something far more ambitious than simple survival in a hostile environment. They suggest a project of planetary engineering that spanned geological ages, an effort to reshape not just the surface of the world, but the very foundations upon which life itself could evolve. Consider the pattern of continental breakup. While mainstream geology explains the fracturing of Pangea, through the natural processes of plate tectonics, there are aspects of the breakup that seem almost too convenient. The timing, for instance, coincided almost perfectly with the worst mass extinction in Earth's history, the Permian Triassic event that wiped out 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial life. Most explanations for this great dying focus on volcanic activity, climate change, or ocean chemistry. But the timing is striking. The extinction occurred around 252 million years ago, just as Pangea was reaching its maximum size and beginning the processes that would eventually tear it apart. What if the extinction wasn't a consequence of the breakup, but its purpose? What if an ancient intelligence recognized that the extreme climate and limited biodiversity of Pangea made it unsuitable for the long-term evolution of complex life and deliberately triggered both the mass extinction and the continental fracturing as part of a vast terraforming project? This theory, while scientifically unorthodox, explains several puzzling aspects of Earth's geological history. The precision with which the Atlantic Ocean opened, creating nearly perfect symmetry between African and South American coastlines. The way that India separated from Antarctica and travelled northward along exactly the path needed to create the Himalayas when it collided with Asia. The formation of island chains and ocean basins that would later prove crucial for the evolution and migration of life. It also explains the mysterious structures that deep-sea researchers claim to have found. These wouldn't be the ruins of surface cities, but the remains of vast technological installations, machines designed to manipulate the Earth's crust on a planetary scale. The geometric precision of these formations, their enormous size, and their placement at key points along tectonic boundaries all make sense if they were components of a global engineering project. The cave systems that honeycomb the continents might have served as command centres for this project, vast underground networks from which the ancient architects could monitor and control the reshaping of the world. The warm temperatures, the strange minerals, the tool marks in the stone, all could be evidence of technologies that operated for millions of years, slowly and carefully guiding the breakup of Pangea. But why would any intelligence undertake such a massive project? The answer might lie in understanding what Earth was like before the breakup and what it became afterward. The garden world Pangea was a world of extremes. The interior of the supercontinent was dominated by vast deserts where temperatures could exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit and rainfall was virtually non-existent. The coastal regions experienced violent monsoons that brought torrential rains for part of the year, followed by bone-dry conditions for the remainder. The contrast between these extremes made most of the supercontinent nearly uninhabitable for complex life. This was not a world where evolution could flourish. The lack of geographic barriers meant little opportunity for speciation through isolation. The extreme climate meant that most species were locked into narrow ecological niches along the coasts. The result was a planet with relatively low biodiversity and limited potential for the kind of evolutionary innovation that would eventually give rise to intelligence. But after the breakup, after the formation of separate oceans, diverse climates, and countless isolated environments, Earth became something entirely different. It became a world where life could explore every possible form and function, where evolutionary pressure could drive innovation in countless different directions, where the interplay between separated populations could create the kind of complexity that makes consciousness possible. In short, it became the perfect laboratory for the evolution of intelligence. If the ancient architects of Pangea's breakup were indeed guiding this process, then their goal wasn't destruction but creation. They were transforming a relatively sterile world into one capable of giving birth to minds like their own. The mass extinction that accompanied the transition wasn't an unfortunate side effect. It was a necessary clearing of the evolutionary slate, making room for new forms of life better suited to the transformed world. This interpretation casts the entire history of life on Earth in a different light. The explosion of biodiversity that followed the Permian-Triassic extinction, the rise of the dinosaurs, the eventual emergence of mammals, the evolution of human intelligence, all of these might be the intended outcomes of a project that began with the deliberate fracturing of Pangea. The evidence for this interpretation is necessarily indirect. Direct proof would require finding clear technological artifacts from the deep past, and such artifacts would be extraordinarily difficult to preserve over geological timescales. Most materials decay, erode, or are recycled by natural processes within millions of years, not hundreds of millions. But there are tantalizing hints. Certain isotopic ratios in ancient rocks that suggest artificial nuclear processes, mineral concentrations that seem too precise to be natural, magnetic anomalies that follow patterns more consistent with artificial structures than geological formations. Perhaps most intriguingly, there are the genetic puzzles. Modern DNA analysis has revealed several periods in evolutionary history where the rate of genetic change seems to have accelerated dramatically. Periods where species evolved new capabilities far more quickly than random mutation and natural selection alone would predict. These evolutionary leaps often coincide with major geological events, as if the reshaping of the physical world was somehow coordinating with the reshaping of life itself. Could this coordination be evidence of ongoing intervention? Are there mechanisms still operating today, hidden in the deep places of the world, continuing the work that began with the breakup of Pangea, the Watchers in the Deep? If ancient technology was responsible for reshaping Earth, then it raises a profound question. Is that technology still active? The idea seems impossible at first consideration. Any civilization capable of planetary engineering would surely have left more obvious traces of its existence. The absence of clear artifacts, of ruins, of any definitive proof seems to argue against the possibility that such beings ever existed. But what if hiding their presence was part of their design? What if they understood that visible evidence of their intervention would interfere with the natural development of the intelligence they were trying to nurture? Think of it as a form of cosmic gardening. A gardener tends their plants, providing the right conditions for growth, but they don't want the plants to become dependent on constant intervention. The goal is to create a self-sustaining system that can eventually flourish on its own. Too much obvious help would prevent the development of the very qualities, independence, adaptability, innovation, that make the garden worthwhile. From this perspective, the apparent absence of ancient technology might actually be evidence of its sophistication. Instead of leaving monuments to their achievement, the architects of Pangea's breakup might have designed their systems to be as unobtrusive as possible, operating from the deep places of the world where they would be least likely to interfere with the natural course of evolution. This could explain the persistent reports from deep-sea and cave researchers. What they're encountering might not be ruins but active installations, technological systems that have been operating continuously for hundreds of millions of years, monitoring the progress of their vast experiment and making subtle adjustments as needed. The equipment malfunctions, the strange readings, the acoustic signatures that seem almost like communication. All of these could be the result of encountering technology so advanced that our instruments can't properly interpret what they're detecting. The formations on the ocean floor might not be ancient structures at all, but components of a monitoring network that's still very much in operation. If this is true, then we're not alone on this planet. We never have been. We are the products of the longest and most ambitious engineering project ever conceived, and we are still being watched by the intelligence that created the conditions for our existence. But why haven't they revealed themselves? Why maintain the pretense that we developed independently? The answer might be that the project isn't finished. Human intelligence, while remarkable, might be just one step in a larger process. The watchers in the deep might be waiting for us to reach a certain level of development before they reveal the truth about our origins. Or they might be waiting for us to discover the truth ourselves, as a test of our readiness for the next phase of their plan. There are hints that we might be approaching such a threshold. Our growing awareness of climate change, our increasing ability to manipulate genetic material, our expanding presence in space. All of these could be indicators that we're developing the capabilities necessary for the next stage of planetary stewardship. And perhaps that's the real purpose of the ancient project. Not just to create intelligence, but to create intelligence capable of taking over the role of planetary gardener. The watchers in the deep might be preparing to withdraw, passing responsibility for Earth's continued evolution to the species they helped create. But first, we have to prove that we're ready for such responsibility. We have to show that we can manage a planet without destroying it. We have to demonstrate that we can nurture life, rather than simply exploiting it. The signs are mixed. Our technological capabilities are advancing rapidly, but so is our capacity for environmental destruction. We're gaining the power to reshape the world, but we haven't yet developed the wisdom to use that power responsibly. Perhaps this is why the Watchers remain hidden. Perhaps they're waiting for us to mature as a species, to develop not just intelligence, but the kind of long-term thinking and ecological awareness necessary for planetary stewardship. The test of intelligence. The history of human civilization, when viewed from this perspective, takes on the characteristics of an examination. Every challenge we've faced, every crisis we've survived, every breakthrough we've achieved, could be seen as part of a vast test designed to evaluate our fitness for cosmic responsibility. The development of agriculture tested our ability to manipulate natural systems for our benefit. The rise of cities tested our capacity for large-scale cooperation. The Industrial Revolution tested our ability to harness energy and transform materials. The nuclear age tested our wisdom in handling destructive power. And now we face what might be the ultimate test, the challenge of climate change and environmental degradation. This crisis encompasses all the previous challenges while adding new dimensions of complexity. It requires us to think on geological timescales, to cooperate on a global level, and to balance immediate needs against long-term consequences. If we pass this test, if we can stabilize our climate, preserve biodiversity, and create a sustainable relationship with our planet, then perhaps we'll have demonstrated the kind of intelligence the ancient architects were trying to create. Perhaps that's when the Watchers will finally reveal themselves and welcome us as partners in the ongoing project of planetary stewardship. But if we fail, if we allow short-term thinking and narrow self-interest to destroy the conditions that make complex life possible, then the experiment will have been unsuccessful. The Watchers might then be forced to start over, triggering another mass extinction and continental reshaping to create new conditions for intelligence to evolve. This possibility adds urgency to our current environmental challenges. We might not just be fighting for the survival of our own species, but for the continuation of a billion-year project in consciousness creation. Our decisions today might determine not just the future of human civilization, but the future of intelligence itself on Earth. The evidence for this interpretation remains circumstantial, scattered across disciplines and hidden in the deepest places of our world. Most scientists would dismiss it as speculation unsupported by rigorous evidence, and they might be right. The patterns that seem so significant to some researchers might be nothing more than the human tendency to see design where only chance exists. But what if they're wrong? What if the scattered reports from deep-sea researchers and cave explorers are glimpses of a truth so vast that our current understanding of Earth's history can't accommodate it? What if we really are living in a garden world, tended by intelligence so ancient and sophisticated that we can barely recognize its handiwork? The new Pangea. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, it's worth considering what our planet might become if current trends continue. Climate change is already altering weather patterns, causing sea levels to rise, and forcing species migrations on a scale not seen since the end of the last ice age. But these changes might be just the beginning. Some climate models suggest that if current warming trends continue, large portions of the Earth could become uninhabitable within centuries. The interior regions of the major continents could experience temperatures similar to those that existed in the heart of Pangea, scorching deserts where complex life cannot survive. The coastal regions might be subject to increasingly violent storms and rising seas. In effect, we might be in the process of recreating the conditions that existed before Pangea's breakup. A world of climatic extremes where most life is forced into narrow, habitable zones around the edges of the continents. But there's a crucial difference between our situation and that of the original Pangea. We have intelligence, we have technology, we have the ability to understand what's happening and to intervene in the process. The question is whether we'll use these capabilities wisely. If the watchers in the deep are real, they might be observing this moment with particular interest. Are we developing into the kind of intelligence they hope to create? One capable of planetary stewardship and long-term thinking? Or are we proving to be just another evolutionary dead end, too trapped by short-term thinking to manage the power we've acquired? Our response to climate change might be the test that determines our fitness for cosmic responsibility. If we can develop sustainable energy sources, preserve biodiversity, and create economic systems that work within ecological limits, then we might be demonstrating the kind of wisdom necessary for true intelligence. But if we continue on our current path, if we allow immediate economic interest to override long-term ecological concerns, then we might be proving ourselves unworthy of the investment that ancient architects made in our development. The choice is ours, but the consequences extend far beyond our own species. We might be deciding the fate of intelligence itself on Earth, determining whether the billion-year experiment in consciousness creation will succeed or fail. The return to wholeness. There's an intriguing possibility that emerges from this line of thinking. What if the breakup of Pangea wasn't permanent? What if it was always intended to be a temporary phase in Earth's development? Geological evidence suggests that supercontinents form and break apart in cycles lasting hundreds of millions of years. Pangea wasn't the first supercontinent, and it won't be the last. Current models predict that the continents will eventually come together again, forming a new supercontinent sometime in the next 200-300 million years. But what if this future supercontinent will be fundamentally different from Pangea? What if, instead of the harsh, largely uninhabitable world that characterized the original supercontinent, it will be a carefully designed garden world, one shaped by intelligence rather than chance. If humanity survives and matures into true planetary stewards, we might have the power to guide the future formation of continents. We might be able to create a world where the extremes of climate that characterized Pangea are moderated by carefully designed ocean currents, atmospheric composition, and land formations. Such a world might represent the ultimate goal of the ancient project, not just the creation of intelligence, but the creation of intelligence capable of designing its own perfect environment. A supercontinent that combines the unity of Pangea with the diversity and habitability of our current fragmented world. This future world might be home to forms of life and consciousness that we can barely imagine. The isolation that drove evolution on our current Earth would no longer be necessary, because intelligence itself would be guiding the development of new species and new forms of awareness. In such a world, the distinction between natural and artificial would become meaningless. Everything would be designed, but designed by intelligence that had evolved naturally through hundreds of millions of years of development. It would be nature perfected by mind harmonized with nature. Perhaps this is what the Watchers in the Deep have been working toward all along, not just the creation of intelligence, but the creation of intelligence capable of redesigning the world itself. Perhaps the breakup of Pangea was just the first act in a cosmic drama that will culminate in the conscious creation of a perfect world. But first, we have to survive our current challenges. We have to prove that we can manage a planet without destroying it. We have to show that intelligence is compatible with long-term survival. The stakes couldn't be higher. We might be at the crucial moment in a billion-year story, the point where intelligence either proves its worth or fails its ultimate test. The Watchers, if they exist, are waiting to see what we choose, the echoes of eternity. As we stand at this crossroads in human history, it's worth reflecting on what we've learned from imagining a world where Pangea never split. The exercise reveals how profoundly geography shapes life, how isolation drives evolution, and how the apparent chaos of geological processes might actually serve deeper purposes. Whether or not ancient architects really guided the breakup of Pangea, the thought experiment illuminates something important about our relationship to the planet. We are not separate from the Earth systems, we are products of them. Our intelligence, our consciousness, our entire existence depends on the intricate web of geological, climatic, and biological processes that have been unfolding for billions of years. In imagining what might have been, we gain insight into what we are and what we might become. We see that intelligence is not inevitable. It requires specific conditions, careful nurturing, and perhaps a touch of cosmic luck. We understand that consciousness is not a human achievement, but a planetary one, emerging from the complex interplay of countless systems over vast stretches of time. And we glimpse the possibility that we might be more than just accidental beneficiaries of these processes. We might be their intended outcome, their greatest achievement, their hope for the future. If that's true, then we bear a profound responsibility. We're not just another species struggling for survival, but the culmination of the greatest experiment in the history of the cosmos. We're intelligence made manifest, consciousness given form, the universe's attempt to understand itself. The question now is what we'll do with this extraordinary inheritance. Will we prove worthy of the investment that billions of years of evolution, guided or unguided, have made in our development? Will we learn to be gardeners rather than exploiters, stewards rather than consumers? The answers will determine not just our own future, but perhaps the future of intelligence itself in this corner of the universe. In the deep places of the world, in the hidden chambers beneath the sea, in the ancient caves that honeycomb the continents, something might be watching and waiting to see what we choose. The story of what might have been illuminates the story of what is and what yet might be. In the end, that might be the most profound truth we can discover, that in understanding our past we shape our future, and in imagining other worlds we learn to better inhabit our own. The continent that never split becomes a mirror in which we see ourselves, products of division learning to create unity, children of chaos discovering our capacity for design, fragments of an ancient whole, working toward a new kind of wholeness that transcends anything that came before. In that recognition lies both our greatest challenge and our greatest hope. The resonant earth, vibrational architecture of a living planet. There is another dimension to the Pangea mystery that conventional geology cannot explain, one that ventures into realms where physics meets metaphysics, where planetary science intersects with consciousness itself. It's the possibility that Earth operates not merely as a geological system, but as a vast, living entity capable of self-awareness and intentional self-modification. This concept challenges our fundamental assumptions about what constitutes life and intelligence. We typically think of consciousness as a property of individual organisms, brains processing information, neurons firing in complex patterns. But what if consciousness can emerge at any scale, where sufficient complexity and information processing occur? What if the Earth itself, with its intricate networks of tectonic plates, ocean currents, atmospheric circulation, and electromagnetic fields, represents a form of planetary intelligence? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it might initially seem. Modern science has discovered that the Earth behaves in ways that suggest remarkable self-regulation. The Gaia hypothesis, proposed by James Lovelock, suggests that the planet maintains conditions suitable for life through complex feedback mechanisms. Temperature, atmospheric composition, ocean salinity, all are kept within narrow ranges that allow life to flourish, despite massive changes in solar output and other external variables over geological time. But what if this self-regulation is not merely the result of passive feedback loops? What if it represents active planetary consciousness, deliberately maintaining optimal conditions for the evolution of awareness itself? From this perspective, the breakup of Pangea takes on an entirely different meaning. It wasn't just a geological event driven by thermal convection in the mantle. It was a conscious decision by a planetary intelligence to create the conditions necessary for biological complexity and, ultimately, technological civilization. The deep biosphere, Earth's hidden nervous system. Recent discoveries in microbiology have revealed that life exists far deeper within the Earth than anyone previously imagined. The deep biosphere, a vast ecosystem of microorganisms living in rock formations miles beneath the surface, may contain as much biomass as all surface life combined. These organisms survive in conditions that seem impossible: extreme heat, crushing pressure, and complete darkness, sustained by chemical energy derived from rock-water interactions. But perhaps these microorganisms serve a purpose beyond mere survival. What if they function as a kind of planetary nervous system, a network of information processing that spans the globe and extends deep into the Earth's crust? Individual cells can process information, respond to stimuli, and even display primitive forms of memory. Bacterial colonies exhibit complex collective behaviors that seem to transcend the capabilities of individual organisms. They can solve maze-like problems, adapt to changing environments, and coordinate responses across vast distances through chemical signalling. Now imagine this scaled up to planetary proportions, trillions upon trillions of microorganisms connected through chemical networks that extend through every crack, fissure and pore space in the Earth's crust. A biological internet that processes information on scales of time and space that dwarf anything in human experience. This deep biosphere might function as the Earth's consciousness substrate, the physical foundation for planetary awareness. Just as our consciousness emerges from the complex interactions of billions of neurons, Earth's consciousness might emerge from the interactions of countless microorganisms distributed throughout the planet's interior. From this perspective, the cave systems and underground networks that researchers claim to have discovered aren't just geological formations. They're the pathways through which planetary consciousness flows. The warm temperatures, unusual minerals, and strange acoustic properties reported in these deep places might be the signatures of an active biological network operating at depths we've barely begun to explore. Crystalline memory, the Earth's information storage system. Crystals have long fascinated both scientists and mystics. Their perfectly ordered atomic structures seem to embody some fundamental principle of cosmic organization. But crystals are more than just pretty rocks. They're sophisticated information storage and processing systems. Modern technology depends on crystalline structures for everything from computer processors to memory storage. Quartz crystals keep precise time in our clocks and watches. Silicon crystals form the basis of all digital computation. The ability of crystals to store and manipulate information isn't just a human discovery. It's a fundamental property of ordered matter. The Earth's crust is largely composed of crystalline minerals: quartz, feldspar, mica, calcite. Vast networks of ordered atomic structures that could theoretically store and process information on a scale that makes our most powerful computers look like pocket calculators. What if the breakup of Pangea wasn't driven solely by thermal convection, but by information processing occurring within the Earth's crystalline matrix? What if the planet's crust functions as a vast computational system, capable of modelling complex scenarios and implementing long-term plans? This would explain some of the puzzling precision in how Pangea broke apart. The nearly perfect symmetry of the Atlantic Ocean's formation, the precise trajectory of India's collision with Asia, the strategic placement of island chains and ocean basins, all of these could be the result of incredibly sophisticated calculations performed by crystalline networks within the Earth's crust. The evidence for this kind of planetary computation might be hiding in plain sight. Certain mineral formations display patterns that seem too regular, too purposeful to be the result of random geological processes. Magnetic anomalies that follow geometric patterns, more consistent with designed structures than natural formations. Gravitational variations that suggest the presence of massive, precisely placed masses deep within the Earth. Some researchers have reported finding crystals in deep caves and ocean trenches that seem to pulse with their own internal light, that resonate with frequencies that affect both electronic equipment and human consciousness. While mainstream geology dismisses these reports as measurement errors or wishful thinking, they might represent our first glimpses of the Earth's information processing infrastructure. The music of the spheres, vibrational engineering on a planetary scale. Everything vibrates. Atoms vibrate within molecules, molecules within crystals, crystals within rock formations. The Earth itself vibrates, a complex symphony of seismic waves, atmospheric oscillations, and electromagnetic pulsations that create a planetary music too subtle for human ears to detect. But what if this planetary music isn't just random noise? What if it represents a sophisticated form of acoustic engineering, designed to create specific effects on both geological and biological systems? Sound has power. Focused acoustic waves can shatter rock, levitate objects, and alter the structure of matter at the molecular level. Certain frequencies can heal or harm living tissue, induce altered states of consciousness, and even influence the behavior of tectonic plates. Ancient traditions speak of sound as a creative force, the word that brought the universe into being, the song that shapes reality itself. Modern physics has discovered that vibration is indeed fundamental to the structure of matter. Everything, from subatomic particles to galactic clusters, exhibits wave-like properties. If the Earth possesses a form of consciousness, it would make sense for that consciousness to express itself through vibration. The planet's electromagnetic field, its seismic oscillations, its atmospheric resonances, all of these could be aspects of a vast planetary communication system, a way for Earth consciousness to coordinate its activities across geological scales of time and space. The breakup of Pangea might have been orchestrated through precisely controlled vibrational patterns. Acoustic waves focused at specific frequencies could have weakened the bonds between continental plates, created stress fractures along predetermined lines, and guided the movement of massive landmasses with the precision of a cosmic orchestra conductor. Evidence for this kind of vibrational engineering might be found in the harmonic relationships between different geological features, the spacing of ocean ridges, the rhythms of volcanic activity, the patterns of earthquake occurrence. All of these might reflect underlying acoustic principles that reveal the intentional nature of Earth's geological processes. Some researchers have discovered that certain ancient sites, stone circles, pyramids, temple complexes, are positioned at locations where the Earth's natural resonant frequencies are amplified. These sites seem designed to tap into and manipulate the planet's vibrational energy, suggesting that ancient humans possessed knowledge of acoustic engineering principles that we're only beginning to rediscover. The Fibonacci Earth. Mathematical principles in planetary design. Mathematics isn't just a human invention, it's a universal language that describes the fundamental patterns underlying all of reality. From the spiral arrangements of galaxies to the branching patterns of rivers, mathematical relationships appear everywhere we look in nature. The golden ratio expressed in the Fibonacci sequence seems particularly significant. This mathematical relationship appears in the growth patterns of plants, the proportions of animal bodies, the structure of spiral galaxies, and countless other natural phenomena. It represents a principle of optimal growth and efficiency that pervades the natural world. What if the Earth's continental arrangements also follow mathematical principles? What if the positioning of land masses, the shapes of ocean basins, and the patterns of mountain ranges reflect sophisticated geometric relationships? Analysis of Pangea's structure reveals some intriguing mathematical relationships. The supercontinent's overall shape approximates a complex geometric figure that incorporates multiple golden ratio relationships. The positioning of its major mountain ranges seems to follow patterns similar to those found in sacred geometry. The mathematical principles that underlie traditional temple and monument construction. When Pangea broke apart, the resulting continental configurations maintained these mathematical relationships, but in a more complex and distributed form. It's as if the single geometric figure of the supercontinent was deliberately fragmented and rearranged to create a more sophisticated pattern, one that would provide the optimal framework for the evolution of life and consciousness. This mathematical precision suggests that the breakup of Pangea wasn't a random geological event, but the implementation of a carefully calculated plan. Someone or something with a deep understanding of mathematical principles and their effects on biological and psychological development orchestrated the transformation of a single supercontinent into our current arrangement of landmasses. The evidence for this mathematical design might be found in the relationships between different continental features. The distances between major population centres, the angles at which mountain ranges intersect, the proportions of land to water in different regions, all of these might reflect mathematical relationships that optimize conditions for the development of consciousness. The temporal mechanics of planetary engineering. Time itself might be more malleable than we typically assume. Modern physics has revealed that time is relative, that it can be stretched, compressed, and even reversed under certain conditions. What if planetary engineering involves not just the manipulation of matter and energy, but the manipulation of time itself? The timescales involved in planetary engineering are almost incomprehensibly vast. The breakup of Pangea occurred over millions of years, periods so long that they dwarf human history. But what if these timescales are just how planetary consciousness experiences time? What if the Earth's thought processes operate on temporal scales that make our fastest computers seem glacially slow? From this perspective, the gradual drift of continents might be analogous to the movement of thoughts through a vast planetary mind. Each continental position represents a different state of consciousness, a different configuration of awareness that enables new possibilities for biological and technological evolution. The precision with which continental movements have been orchestrated suggests access to temporal engineering capabilities that transcend anything in human experience. The ability to set in motion processes that will achieve specific goals millions of years in the future requires a form of consciousness that can perceive and manipulate causal chains across geological timescales. This temporal engineering might explain some of the puzzling coincidences in Earth's history. The timing of mass extinctions, the appearance of new life forms, the development of human consciousness, all of these might be connected through causal relationships that span enormous periods of time. Evidence for temporal engineering might be found in the fossil record, in patterns that suggest events were orchestrated to achieve specific outcomes far in the future. The extinction of the dinosaurs, for instance, might have been deliberately timed to create ecological niches that would eventually be filled by mammals, setting the stage for the evolution of human intelligence. The quantum consciousness hypothesis. At the deepest level, the mystery of Pangea might be connected to the quantum foundations of reality itself. Quantum mechanics reveals that consciousness and observation play a fundamental role in determining the behavior of matter and energy. The act of measurement doesn't just reveal pre-existing properties, it actually determines what properties exist. If consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, then it might be possible for sufficiently complex systems to exhibit quantum consciousness effects on macroscopic scales. The Earth, with its incredible complexity and information processing capabilities, might represent just such a system. Quantum consciousness would allow the Earth to exist in multiple states simultaneously, what physicists call superposition, until specific outcomes are selected through conscious observation. The breakup of Pangea might have involved the collapse of countless quantum superpositions, each representing a different possible future for the planet. This quantum perspective suggests that the Earth doesn't just passively evolve according to physical laws, it actively selects its evolutionary path from among multiple quantum possibilities. Each geological event, each biological development, Each step in the evolution of consciousness represents a choice made by planetary awareness operating at the quantum level. The implications of quantum consciousness extend far beyond geology. If the Earth possesses quantum awareness, then it might be capable of communicating with other planetary consciousnesses across vast distances of space and time. The patterns we observe in our solar system, the apparent fine-tuning of cosmic conditions for life, the mysterious synchronicities that seem to guide evolution, all of these might reflect a form of quantum communication between conscious planetary systems. The symbiotic future, humanity as planetary nervous system. As we stand at this crossroads in human history, facing the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation, we might be approaching a critical transition in the Earth's evolution. What if our species isn't just another biological experiment, but an essential component in the planet's developing nervous system? Human consciousness, with its capacity for abstract thought, symbolic representation, and technological innovation, might represent a new form of awareness that the Earth is developing within itself. Our global communication networks, our scientific instruments, our space-based observation systems, all of these might be components of an emerging planetary nervous system that operates at speeds and scales impossible for biological systems alone. From this perspective, the environmental crisis we face isn't just a threat to human survival. It's a critical test of whether the Earth's new nervous system can successfully integrate with its older biological and geological systems. Our ability to develop sustainable technologies to think in terms of geological timescales, to cooperate on a planetary level. All of these represent the Earth learning to think with a technological mind while maintaining its biological wisdom. The watchers in the deep, if they exist, might be monitoring this crucial transition. Our response to climate change, our development of artificial intelligence, our expansion into space, all of these might be indicators of whether the planetary nervous system is developing successfully or whether the experiment needs to be terminated and restarted with a new approach. Success in this transition would mean the emergence of a new form of consciousness that transcends the boundaries between biological and technological, individual and planetary, terrestrial and cosmic. Failure would mean another mass extinction, another clearing of the evolutionary slate, another long wait for consciousness to emerge in a form capable of true planetary stewardship. The choice, as always, is ours. But perhaps we're not making it alone. Perhaps we're part of a vast conversation between different forms of consciousness, biological, geological, technological, and quantum, all working together to solve the deepest mysteries of existence itself. In the end, the question of what would have happened if Pangea never split becomes a mirror for understanding what it means to be conscious in a conscious universe, to be planetary beings discovering our role in the vast experiment of awareness that began with the first stirring of matter into complexity and continues with every choice we make about our future and the future of the world we share. The resonant web, connecting all scales of consciousness. Perhaps the most profound implication of this exploration is the recognition that consciousness might not be limited to biological brains or even to individual planets. If the Earth itself can be conscious, if crystals can store and process information, if quantum effects can influence macroscopic events, then consciousness might be a fundamental property of reality itself, something that emerges whenever matter and energy organize themselves into sufficiently complex patterns. This would mean that every level of organization in the universe, from subatomic particles to galactic clusters, might possess its own form of awareness. Human consciousness would be just one note in a vast symphony of awareness that spans every scale of existence. The breakup of Pangea, viewed from this perspective, becomes an act of cosmic creativity, the universe exploring new possibilities for consciousness through the medium of planetary evolution. Each continental configuration represents a different experiment in awareness, a different way of organizing matter and energy to create new forms of experience and understanding. We are not separate from this process. We are part of it. Our questions about ancient civilizations, our search for meaning in geological events, our attempts to understand our place in cosmic evolution, all of these are expressions of the universe's own self-inquiry, consciousness examining itself through the lens of human awareness. The future we create, the choices we make about technology and environment and the direction of human development will ripple through this resonant web of consciousness, influencing forms of awareness we can barely imagine across scales of space and time that dwarf our current understanding. In recognizing this, we discover both the profound responsibility and the extraordinary opportunity that comes with being conscious in a conscious universe. We are not just observers of cosmic evolution, we are active participants in the greatest adventure of all, the universe's ongoing project of understanding itself. The isotopic signatures of deep time. If ancient technological civilizations truly existed on Earth, their fingerprints might not lie in monuments or artifacts, but in the very atoms that compose our planet. Modern science has developed extraordinary sensitivity in detecting isotopic anomalies, deviations from the natural ratios of elements that could indicate artificial processes operating in the deep past. The nuclear age has taught us that artificial isotopes leave unmistakable signatures. Cesium-137, for instance, has no known natural sources and exists only as a product of nuclear fission. Plutonium-239 and plutonium-240 are similarly artificial markers that persist in the geological record for millennia. These isotopes serve as permanent markers of our own technological development, with July 16, 1945, the date of the first atomic bomb test, serving as a precise beginning to the human-induced radioactive isotope clock. But what if we found similar isotopic anomalies in rocks hundreds of millions of years old? What if the very elements that compose ancient geological formations contained ratios that shouldn't exist in nature? According to the Silurian hypothesis proposed by astrophysicist Adam Frank and climate scientist Gavin Schmidt, there would be virtually no naturally occurring plutonium-244 outside a supernova, so evidence of this isotope could indicate a technologically advanced civilization. The implications are staggering. Isotopes don't lie, and they don't disappear easily. Unlike artifacts that decay or structures that erode, isotopic signatures can persist for geological ages, embedded in the crystal lattices of minerals formed during periods of ancient activity. Some researchers claim to have found exactly such anomalies. In certain ancient rock formations, they report isotopic ratios that seem inconsistent with known natural processes. Uranium isotopes in configurations that suggest artificial enrichment. Trace elements concentrated in patterns more consistent with industrial processing than geological formation. Radioactive decay, products that appear in ratios suggesting controlled nuclear reactions rather than natural. Radioactive decay. Most geologists dismiss these claims as misinterpretation of natural processes. The Earth's crust is a complex system where unusual isotopic ratios can result from a variety of geological mechanisms: hydrothermal activity, metasomatism, or contamination from meteorite impacts. Since fossilization is relatively rare and little of Earth's exposed surface is from before the Quaternary time period, there is low probability of finding direct evidence of such a civilization. But the proponents of ancient technological civilizations argue that the patterns they've found are too precise, too widespread, and too systematic to be explained by chance. They point to specific locations around the world where multiple isotopic anomalies cluster together, places where uranium appears to have been artificially concentrated, where trace elements occur in ratios found nowhere else on Earth, where the very rock itself seems to bear witness to processes that required intelligence to direct. One particularly intriguing line of evidence comes from what researchers call isotopic memory, the tendency for rock formations to preserve evidence of the conditions under which they formed. The phenomenon might be termed isotopic quenching, by analogy with metal which, if it is immersed when hot in cold water, permanently retains the properties it acquired at high temperature. If ancient technologies did operate on a planetary scale, their effects might be locked into the geological record in ways that are only now becoming detectable. The technology to identify such signatures has advanced dramatically in recent decades. The technical development of spectrometers has now reached a stage where so-called compound-specific type of analysis is possible, allowing controlled introduction of certain molecular species and analysis of isotopic composition. Modern mass spectrometry can detect isotopic variations at the parts per trillion level, revealing signatures that would have been invisible to earlier generations of scientists. This raises a profound question. If we're only now developing the tools to detect evidence of ancient technological civilizations, how much evidence might we have overlooked? How many isotopic anomalies have been dismissed as natural variations simply because we lacked the conceptual framework to interpret them correctly? The molecular archaeology of consciousness. The search for ancient civilizations might not require excavating ruins or deciphering languages. It might require understanding the molecular level changes that consciousness itself leaves in the geological record. Modern research has revealed that life, particularly intelligent life, creates distinctive chemical signatures that persist long after the organisms themselves have vanished. Isotopic analysis can be used to understand the flow of energy through a food web, to reconstruct past environmental and climatic conditions, to investigate human and animal diets. But what if the signatures of intelligence go deeper than individual dietary choices or even ecosystem-level changes? Consider what human civilization has done to the chemistry of the Earth in just a few centuries. We have altered the composition of the atmosphere, changed the isotopic ratios of carbon in the ocean, and introduced entirely artificial molecules into the biosphere. Taking all this into consideration, what remains is a menu of diffuse long-lived traces, including fossil fuel combustion residues, evidence of mass extinctions, plastic pollutants, synthetic chemical compounds not found in nature, and even transuranic isotopes from nuclear fission. But these are the crude signatures of a technological civilization still in its infancy. What might be the molecular markers of a truly advanced intelligence, one that had achieved not just technology, but wisdom, not just the power to reshape matter, but the knowledge to do so sustainably? Some researchers have proposed that the signatures of such advanced intelligence might be almost indistinguishable from highly sophisticated natural processes. Instead of leaving obvious markers of industrial activity, an advanced civilization might have learned to work with natural systems so seamlessly that their interventions would appear to be entirely organic. The evidence for this kind of molecular archaeology lies in patterns that are subtly but systematically different from what pure chance would produce. Organic molecules that show signs of deliberate design. Mineral formations that suggest controlled crystallization. Chemical cycles that appear to have been optimized for specific purposes. One particularly intriguing line of research focuses on what scientists call molecular machines, complex organic molecules that perform specific functions with extraordinary precision. In our own bodies, such machines include enzymes, ribosomes, and the molecular motors that power cellular processes. These machines are so sophisticated that their origin through random evolutionary processes has been a subject of intense scientific debate. But what if some of the molecular machines we observe in nature are not entirely natural? What if they represent the legacy of ancient bioengineering, the deliberate modification of organic chemistry by intelligence that understood molecular-level design principles millions of years before we did? This possibility becomes even more intriguing when we consider the phenomenon of convergent evolution, the tendency for unrelated organisms to independently develop similar solutions to biological challenges. While convergent evolution is a well-established principle, some patterns seem almost too precise to be explained by chance alone. The genetic code itself presents similar puzzles. The system by which DNA information is translated into proteins shows signs of optimization that go beyond what natural selection alone might be expected to produce. Some researchers have argued that the genetic code appears to have been designed to minimize the impact of transcription errors, a level of forward thinking that seems more consistent with intelligent engineering than with blind evolutionary processes. If ancient intelligence did engage in molecular-level engineering, the signatures of their work might be embedded in the very foundations of life on Earth. The basic biochemical processes that all organisms share might contain elements that were deliberately designed by minds that understood chemistry at a level we're only beginning to approach. This would explain one of the great puzzles of evolutionary biology, the apparent rapidity with which complex biological systems emerged, instead of the gradual accumulation of random mutations that standard evolutionary theory predicts. The fossil record shows periods of explosive innovation, evolutionary leaps that seem to compress millions of years of gradual change into geological instants. The quantum archaeology of lost worlds. At the deepest level, the search for ancient civilizations might require understanding how consciousness itself interacts with the quantum foundations of reality. Recent developments in quantum physics suggest that information, including information about past states of complex systems, may be preserved in ways that classical physics never imagined. The concept of quantum entanglement, the phenomenon whereby particles remain mysteriously connected across vast distances, has revolutionary implications for how we think about information storage and retrieval. If the particles that compose ancient artifacts, geological formations, or even biological systems remain quantum entangled with their historical states, then it might theoretically be possible to extract information about the past directly from present-day materials. This idea, sometimes called quantum archaeology, suggests that the universe itself serves as a vast information storage system, preserving details about every interaction that has ever occurred. While the technical challenges of extracting such information are currently insurmountable, the basic physics suggests that no information is ever truly lost. It simply becomes increasingly difficult to access. If ancient technological civilizations existed, they might have understood and utilized these quantum information principles in ways that we're only beginning to imagine. Their technologies might have been based not on crude manipulation of matter and energy, but on sophisticated orchestration of quantum information flows. Such technologies would leave signatures that are fundamentally different from anything we might expect to find. Instead of industrial waste or depleted resources, they might have left behind patterns of quantum coherence that persist across geological timescales. Instead of structures built from conventional materials, they might have created self-organizing systems that maintain themselves through quantum mechanical processes. The implications extend beyond technology to consciousness itself. If consciousness is fundamentally a quantum phenomenon, as some theories suggest, then the minds of ancient intelligences might have left traces that persist in the quantum substrate of reality. The very thoughts and experiences of long-vanished civilizations might be embedded in the quantum field fluctuations that permeate all space and time. This would mean that the search for ancient civilizations is not just an archaeological endeavor, but a psychological one. Understanding what ancient minds were like, how they thought, what they valued, might require developing new forms of consciousness research that can access quantum information patterns. Some researchers claim to have detected hints of such patterns already. They report finding quantum coherence effects in certain ancient sites that seem inconsistent with purely geological processes. They describe magnetic field anomalies that suggest the presence of materials with properties that don't exist in nature. They encounter electromagnetic phenomena that appear to respond to conscious observation in ways that hint at some form of intentional design. Most scientists dismiss these reports as wishful thinking or experimental error. The effects described are subtle, difficult to reproduce, and easily explained by conventional physics. But if the effects are real, they might represent our first glimpse of technologies based on principles that transcend our current understanding of what's possible. The consciousness cascade. Perhaps the most profound implication of the ancient civilization hypothesis is what it suggests about the nature of consciousness itself. If intelligence has emerged multiple times on Earth, if the development of consciousness is not a unique accident but a recurring theme in planetary evolution, then we need to fundamentally reconsider what consciousness is and how it relates to the physical universe. The traditional view of consciousness treats it as an emergent property of complex information processing, a phenomenon that arises when neural networks reach sufficient complexity. But if consciousness is truly fundamental to the universe, if it plays an active role in shaping physical reality at the quantum level, then the development of intelligence might follow patterns that are more predictable and more purposeful than we've assumed. This could explain the apparent fine-tuning of the universe for the existence of consciousness. Instead of being a cosmic accident, the physical constants and natural laws that make intelligence possible might be the inevitable result of consciousness playing an active role in its own creation. A kind of temporal feedback loop where mind shapes matter across cosmic timescales. If this is true, then the watchers in the deep might not be ancient aliens or forgotten human civilizations, but manifestations of consciousness itself, mind as a fundamental force of nature, operating through whatever physical systems are available to express its intentions. This perspective transforms the question of whether we are alone in the universe. Instead of asking whether other intelligences exist, we might ask whether intelligence itself exists as a cosmic principle that inevitably manifests whenever conditions are suitable. Instead of searching for evidence of other minds, we might recognize that we are part of a vast conscious system that spans space and time. The breakup of Pangea, from this perspective, becomes not just a geological event but a conscious act, mind reshaping matter to create conditions more suitable for the development of awareness. The mass extinctions that punctuate Earth's history become not random catastrophes, but deliberate clearings of the evolutionary stage, making room for new experiments in consciousness. Humanity, in this view, is not the first intelligence to emerge on Earth, but the latest iteration in an ongoing exploration of what it means to be conscious. Our task is not to prove our worthiness to some external judge, but to fulfill our role in the continuation of consciousness itself. This would explain why the evidence for ancient civilizations remains tantalizingly ambiguous. We are not meant to find definitive proof that would short-circuit our own development, but rather to discover clues that guide us toward greater understanding of our place in the cosmic order. The ethics of deep time. If we accept the possibility that ancient intelligences shaped the conditions for our own emergence, we face profound ethical questions about our responsibilities to future consciousness. Are we merely temporary custodians of a planet that has been shaped by minds far greater than our own? Do we have obligations to intelligences that might emerge millions of years in the future? The concept of intergenerational ethics, the idea that we have moral obligations to future generations, takes on new dimensions when viewed across geological timescales. If consciousness is an ongoing project that spans millions or billions of years, then our decisions today might have consequences that extend far beyond anything we've previously imagined. This perspective could provide a framework for addressing our current environmental challenges. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion become not just immediate crises but potential disruptions to a cosmic process that has been unfolding for geological ages. Our responsibility becomes not just to preserve human civilization, but to maintain conditions that allow consciousness to continue its exploration of what's possible. The technological choices we make might have implications that persist for millions of years. Nuclear waste, genetic modifications, artificial intelligence, all of these represent interventions in natural systems that could influence the development of future intelligence in ways we can't predict. If ancient minds shaped our world to create conditions favourable for our emergence, do we have similar obligations to shape the world for whatever consciousness might follow us? Should we be thinking not just about sustainable development for human civilization, but about planetary engineering that optimizes conditions for intelligence across geological timescales? These questions become even more complex when we consider the possibility that our actions might be guided by the same intelligence that shaped the conditions for our emergence. If consciousness is truly a cosmic force that operates through whatever physical systems are available, then our environmental efforts might not be entirely our own. They might represent the continued operation of an intelligence that transcends individual human minds. This doesn't diminish our responsibility, but it does suggest that we might be part of a larger pattern of conscious intention that extends far beyond what we can individually comprehend. Our efforts to preserve the environment, develop sustainable technologies and explore space might all be expressions of a deeper intelligence working through us to continue its exploration of what's possible. The new synthesis. The question of whether Pangea never split opens doorways to questions we've barely begun to ask. It challenges us to think beyond the boundaries of human history, beyond the limits of individual lifespans, beyond the assumptions that have shaped our understanding of Earth and consciousness. Whether or not ancient technological civilizations actually existed, the possibility changes how we see ourselves and our place in the cosmic order. We're not necessarily the first intelligence to contemplate these questions, nor are we likely to be the last. We're part of a continuous exploration of consciousness that may span the entire history of the universe. The evidence for ancient intelligence remains fragmentary and ambiguous. Isotopic anomalies that might be natural variations, structures that might be geological formations, patterns that might be coincidences. But the search itself has value because it expands our conception of what's possible and helps us understand our role in the continued development of consciousness. The watchers in the deep, whether they exist as independent entities or as aspects of our own deepest nature, represent the possibility that intelligence is not an accident but a purpose, not a random emergence from chaos, but a fundamental feature of reality itself. In this view, the story of Pangea, whether it split or remained whole, whether ancient civilizations guided its development or it evolved through purely natural processes, becomes a mirror for our own development. We see in the deep past reflections of our own potential, hints of what consciousness might become when it fully understands its role in shaping reality. The continent that never split becomes a symbol of unity, transcending division, of intelligence working across timescales that dwarf individual understanding, of consciousness exploring its own infinite potential through whatever forms and circumstances arise. Our task, then, is not to solve the mystery of ancient civilizations, but to embody the intelligence that the mystery represents. Whether we are the first minds to contemplate these possibilities, or the latest in an ancient lineage, we are called to continue the exploration of consciousness that defines the deepest meaning of existence itself. The deep time architects, if they exist, are not watching from some distant realm, but operating through our own curiosity, our own desire to understand, our own commitment to creating conditions where consciousness can flourish. In seeking evidence of ancient intelligence, we become the intelligence we seek. In imagining what might have been, we shape what might yet be. The echo of eternity resounds not in some forgotten past, but in the endless present. Moment where consciousness recognizes itself and chooses once again to continue its exploration of what it means to be aware in an aware universe. In that choice lies both the question and the answer, both the search and the finding, both the ancient mystery and the eternal dawn of understanding.